Shalom and welcome again to Secrets of Meaning, the podcast and TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. And we appreciate your time. And if you'd like to contact us, by the way, just drop me an email at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Visit the website, jewishsacredaging.com, the Facebook page. You all know the drill by now, the usual sources. One of the more interesting sources in the Jewish world is this thing called Mussar, and we are absolutely honored to welcome to today's Seekers of Meaning Dr. Alan Morinis, the author of this brand new book, that fantastic book, The Shabbat Effect, Jewish Wisdom for Growth and Transformation. So let me get right to the heart of this. For my colleagues, Jewish educators, Jewish book clubs, check this out. I think you will really enjoy it. There's a tremendous amount of information in here. Alan is the founder of the Mussar Institute, and I have a hunch that many of you who will be watching or listening are involved in Mussar Institute work. I know several of my friends are. So, Alan, welcome back to Seekers of Meaning. How are you? How are you feeling? How are you doing?
Thank you very much. Well, the answer to that question is a long one, but in my small world, everything is going remarkably well. I feel blessed and I'm very grateful. The larger world is very problematic right now, and so I'm caught between gratitude for the blessings in my life and real concern for the issues that our world is facing right now.
Well, I think we all share that, and that's why the book, I think, is so timely and important. Because you bring the ethics, values, ideology, and neshama of Mussar. Let's also get this out. If somebody wants to contact or make a connection with the Mussar Institute, how do they do that? What's the website? How do they do that?
It's as obvious as it should be, which is mussarinstitute.org. The only thing you have to remember is .org, not .com. It's Mussar with two S's and Institute, mussarinstitute.org.
Alan, what's the Shabbat Effect?
That is the title of the book, and the graphic on the front cover shows two Shabbat candles and light emerging from them, which is a metaphor for, thank you for being the assistant who shows the props. The whole idea of Shabbat, as defined in the Torah, is 1 day a week, which is very, very different from the other 6 days a week. And we say that, even in the Havdalah ceremony, God differentiates Shabbat from the 6 days of doing, the 6 days of making. And that can lead people to think that, that if I were to observe a Shabbat, or if I do observe a Shabbat, I have two different realities. The one on that seventh day, which is really consecrated and set apart, and the other 6 days where I busy myself in the material world and I'm just involved in, the kinds of things that are ordinary and everyday and mundane. The reality that I've experienced in my own life, which is what motivated me to write this book, is that that's a false dichotomy. That what happens is on that seventh day, if it's really set aside and if it's done with intentionality, then qualities get developed, which, if you think about it, 1 day a week practicing certain things week after week after week is a major commitment which changes, which has a big impact on certain things, which is the subject of the book, which things, and that actually has a pervasive influence on the other 6 days of the week. So the observance of Shabbat has an effect. One of the alternative titles I had for it was the Shabbat dividend. It sounded too financial in the final analysis, but it's good. It's a dividend. You invest, and it pays a dividend on the other 6 days of the week.
Shabbat, can it literally transform a human being?
I think it has a transformative impact on a human being. I think until some date in the future, may it be today or tomorrow, we're not going to be completely transformed. One of the things I've learned in my study of Mussar is to accept that all of life is a journey of growth. And so the notion of being transformed is like the notion of being enlightened, which it's a past tense. It reaches a certain point when it's over. Enlightened, transcend, transformed. There's a completion there. Life is not like that. Life is an ongoing journey of engagement, learning, growing, forgetting, sinking, rising up. And it doesn't seem to me there's an end to that. It seems to me the process is the significant thing. So this is an influence that can have, Shabbat observance can have an enormous impact on the other 6 days of the week. Just the 8 qualities that I deal with in the book, that's not all. But those 8 are particularly important, and they represent what the power of Shabbat can be as a transformative influence.
Mussar is a traditional Jewish practice around ethics, highlighting a variety of midot, of values, if I can use that word. You write in the book, and you give tremendous amount of credit, which is lovely, to I guess, is it fair to call him your mentor, Rabbi Per? Could you just, obviously this person has a tremendous place in your life. Could you just give him some honor? And who was this man, and why was he so important to you?
That's the easiest question anybody could ever ask me.
Okay, well,
because there's no way I can speak about Rabbi Per except in with an attitude of honor. I grew up with a very secular background, Jewish. Both my parents Jewish, both spoke Yiddish as their first language, but not very involved at all in Jewish thought and practice, very secular. And I mentioned that in the book as well, because my father's notion of rest on Shabbat was lying down on the couch and watching bowling on television and falling asleep. That was it. I mean, it was like there were no candles, there was no wine, there was nothing. And for good reason. It had to do with their own background. But midlife, I had a case of late onset Judaism, and that propelled me on a search, because it's a long story of how that happened, and it's actually my first book, Climbing Jacob's Ladder, tells that story. But it sent me out into the world to say there must be deep spiritual teaching in Judaism. We couldn't have existed as a people and persisted for thousands of years on responsive reading. There had to be depth of spiritual guidance, but I had no idea where to look. Long story short, eventually, just because he wrote the introductory blurb on a book, I became aware of this man who was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva of Far Rockaway in Queens, New York. And, the word yeshiva to me was alien talk. I knew nothing. I had never set foot in a yeshiva. And I was 49 years old. So this was not like, my father took me by the hand. And I went and met with him. And in my very first walking into his office, he stood up, came around the desk, and said to me, "May I give you a kiss?" I was blown away. It's like, nowadays you'd say, would you sign a consent form that I can give you a kiss?
Right.
But he came from the heart, and it was warm and it was genuine. And I've heard from other people since that it was typical of him to be welcoming like that for someone who was, in effect, an alien in his world. I knew nothing. I had no place. I didn't know what to do. Like, I was completely unaware of how do you conduct yourself in an Orthodox yeshiva. But when he died, which was May of last year, I couldn't go to the funeral, but they, simulcasted it, and people's eulogies. And one of the eulogies began with somebody saying, "The Rosh Yeshiva was an investor." That was his opening line of his eulogy. And there was somebody I didn't know. But I thought, yep, he invested in me. He really did. He took me in. He took me home. I would spend Shabbat with the family. I spent sometimes a month living in their basement at a time. He would make time for me. He would teach me. He was a very generous man. He was very aware of the world. He would listen to NPR. And, there's a very funny story, which I'm not going to go into in length, but I was at a wedding with him, and there was a tune. The band was playing a tune. And, the men and the women were separated. The men were dancing. And he said to me, he leaned over me, and he said quite loudly, because the music was loud, he said, "Do you recognize that tune?" And I listened, and I thought, well, yes, I do. That's that Mexican love song, Bésame Mucho. And I laughed, and he laughed, and we laughed. He said, they think it's a Hasidic niggin. And then I thought, how do you know it? How do you know Bésame Mucho, Mr. Rosh Yeshiva in the Black Hat Yeshiva? Because he was very aware of the world, and he had a very strong, extraordinarily strong sense of curiosity. He liked to take apart clocks and put them back together. He once said to me, he said, "Do you know how many stars there are in the universe?" He was like that. That was of interest to him enough to question me on that. But he understood me and where I was coming from, and he put absolutely no pressure on me, much as in my book, there's no pressure about what a Shabbat should be for someone. I don't even discuss that in the book. But he opened up for me an understanding of what was possible on Jewish pathways that influences the way I approach the book. What is possible on Jewish pathways? One of the topics that I really hammer on in my teaching these days, not in the book, I don't know if I mentioned in the book, is the idea that Jews who grew up in the post-Holocaust world, for the most part, anywhere in the Jewish world, including in the Orthodox Jewish world, are in fact spiritual orphans. We grew up disconnected from our own spiritual traditions. And he showed me and he led me. He was not disconnected. On his father's side, he had a connection to one branch of Mussar, and through his wife's family, he had a connection to another branch of Mussar, which was an unbroken line of continuity down to him. And, that was so different from my own experience growing up. I had a very good family. It was a great family. But it didn't have that. It didn't have a sense of the kinds of teachings and guidance and wisdom that helps a person navigate life. And that's what I understand spirituality to be. Not to take you out of life. That was back to your question about transformation. It's engaged. It's in the real world. It's in a family. It's in a household. It's in your driving. And he showed me that. And I did an appreciation for him for the Mussar Institute after he passed away. And I spent an hour telling stories about when we went to the grocery store together, and all the things that would go on, which were I went to the barber shop with him, it wasn't like sitting in a kind of holy isolation. It was a holy engagement. I could go on.
You mentioned the spiritual exile post-Holocaust. One of the things which I think is motivating the growth and popularity of the Mussar Institute, because we're finding this in the work of Jewish Sacred Aging, is that there are people of our generation, they understand now that they are spiritual, they are in exile spiritually. And as the clock of mortality becomes more aware to them, they really are saying, well, what really does this mean? And I think the litany of midot and the practice of this speaks to so many people saying, here's something I can, it can give me a foundation of faith that I never had before. It's not just celebration and performance. It's tachlis. You write it in the book of this phrase called hitlamdut. Hitlamdut. Walk me through what that word means and why it's so important to Mussar.
It comes from a root that people might be more familiar with from limud or lilamed or melamed, which all are words that connect to the notion of learning. But hit, the prefix hit, puts it in the hitpael form of verb, and that means it's self-reflexive. So that means hitlamdut means to teach yourself or to cause learning yourself. And this was a fundamental idea of Mussar teachers. Well, it actually goes back to Maimonides as a concept. But one teacher in particular who died in 2005 was Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, and he made a big deal out of the idea of hitlamdut, the idea that the greatest teacher, the greatest spiritual teacher that a person can have is in fact their own experience. And we have an opportunity to approach life with tremendous curiosity about what lessons we can learn from how we interact and relate with other people, with things, with our own selves, with our bodies. Everything is an opportunity for learning. And Rabbi Wolbe said that this is so profoundly true that he said even a person on their deathbed can be learning how to die, which is like, to have that kind of awareness that life is just a source of lessons. And even to the final moment, a person can be learning and developing and growing. It's a very powerful thing. And I see that all the time, that I run into situations and from a certain point of view, which is cultivated, I can then turn and say, okay, what's the lesson here? It was Shabbat, this past Shabbat, I was sitting and I noticed my cell phone cord, my charging cord, didn't have a cell phone on the end of it. And I thought, Friday I always plug in, every evening I plug in my cell phone.
Right.
Where was my cell phone? And I looked around and it was nowhere. And I had to think, what was going on here? And from a standpoint of hitlamdut, what I saw was this was a tremendous opportunity for me to disengage from the things which were beyond my control and to engage with what was in my control. So the hitlamdut was, this is a lesson in bitachon, which means trust. Because am I going to let this, my choice, up to me, am I going to let this loss of my cell phone interfere with my Shabbat? Like, what am I doing today? What's my real engagement today? And am I going to be caught up in that? Or am I going to go into the space of trust? And that was a lesson for me, because the cell phone was in the back of my car. It was in the back seat. When I had handed it to one of my grandchildren, they had left it there, and it was fine. And I didn't need to worry about it. And, the lesson is very often that kind of thing, which really comes out of the little tests and sometimes the big tests that show up in everyday life.
We're speaking with Dr. Alan Morinis, who has his brand new book, recommended very highly, especially to my colleagues, The Shabbat Effect, Jewish Wisdom for Growth and Transformation. Again, you alluded to before, I want to get to this now, these series of practices, the idea of incorporating these 8 practices, not just on one day, but really expanding them to have it encompass one's week, one's life. And you start with this concept of zichrut, which you call awareness, I think. Mm-hmm. And then you have holiness, contentment, joy, rest, peace, silence, trust, all these, but you begin with this sense of awareness. So could you just walk us through these 8 practices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I probably won't get through all 8, but I can certainly discuss the model because it applies to all 8. The book is about Shabbat. It's about the observance of Shabbat. It's about the impact on the life all 7 days a week of observing a Shabbat this one day a week. But at another level, the book is about the interplay of religion and spirituality, because Shabbat is clearly a religious practice. It's a mitzvah. It's one of the 10 commandments. It's like one of the top 10. And it comes with all kinds of practices and rules and restrictions and, things that are positively invoked, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really part of religion. But if you look at the notion of rest, that's a spiritual quality. And all the observances of Shabbat have a spiritual intentionality to them. And that is where we find the intersection of religion and spirituality. So then, if we look at the first quality you mentioned, zihirut, which really does have a notion of awareness, the root of zihirut, which is Zayin He Resh, is the same root as the word Zohar, the mystical text, and even the notion of, which translates as radiance or shining, and the notion of the radiance of the sun is the same word is used to describe the radiance. And what we're talking about is the radiance of the mind here, the radiance of the human mind, having a radiant mind. And I contrast it in the book to having a dull mind. And we all know what a dull mind is like and what comes of that when you're not really even there, and what comes of having a bright mind, a sharp mind, an illuminated mind, in an ordinary sense of illuminated, of really being clear and paying attention. And when you look at the laws of Shabbat or the practices of Shabbat, there's a lot of precision. A lot of things happen at certain times and not at other times. Things that are meant to be handled, things that are meant not to be handled, and things that are meant to be done and not done at this time. There's a lot of that which can seem to be really just clutter. It can seem to be a real overburdening of guidelines or rules or restrictions. But for one who experiences it with the right intentionality, it becomes, as you said, it's a practice. It's not a quality. It's a practice of becoming aware because there are sharp distinctions. And those sharp distinctions are a practice of mind to be aware of them and to observe them, and sometimes to step over them. Rabbi Pear once said to me, he said, sometimes in life you need to go right up to the edge of the cliff and fall over. And there are times of breach, and those are also lessons in awareness, because you go, oh, I missed it, and then if you think about it in terms of right and wrong and reward and punishment, that's one framework. But if you think of it in terms of cultivating awareness, then stepping over, making a mistake, going over the line is not fatal. It's what clarifies how aware you are and how not, and where that happens. And I use an example in the book of picking a leaf on the street. Just because you're standing there talking to someone and you just unconsciously reach over and do something, that's a great lesson. It's a great lesson on how conscious are you and how do you cultivate that bright awareness. And Shabbat is a practice for that. And then joy, and then trust. I just gave an example of trust with my cell phone. And then all these other qualities. I'll just mention one more because it has real practical implications. And then you can ask me if you want me to go somewhere else with this. There's a quality called histapkut, which is means being satisfied with what you have. And in the book I translate it as enoughness. And one of the rules of Shabbat is you don't acquire anything. You don't shop. You don't, buy anything. You don't spend money. You don't order anything online. You don't do any of that stuff. And the practice is to say, what I have is enough. That I'm going to step out of the cycle, the compulsive cycle, which seems to be really, driven in our time and in our world, to be a consumer, to be more and more and more, and new and upgrade, and one day a week, you don't. One day a week, it's enough. It says in Pirkei Avot, who is rich? One who celebrates or rejoices in what they have. And it's not to say that you don't need things. It's not to say you don't want things or you don't need to actually buy something new. But that one day a week that interrupts the compulsion, that's a huge teaching, because you realize it's up to you. It's not a compulsion. It's in your hands to do, to decide to what extent, when, how, to be a wise consumer and an aware and conscious consumer. That's another lesson. That's another dividend of a Shabbat practice. And like that, through 8 qualities that have a place 7 days a week. But if you didn't have a day of interruption of commerce, then it would just be 7 days a week of commerce and no learning and no transformation and no new tools the other 6 days of the week as well.
Yeah, this concept of enough, when I was reading, I said, it flies in the face of the American idea of you must produce something. You're judged on how much you produce. And what we are finding too in some of our work is that many people at this stage of life saying, I have enough.
Yeah.
And then they turn from the material to the spiritual to fill that void, as you were talking about before, this spiritual exile, so to speak. And you also write about this idea of rest. You alluded to this, and refreshment, vayinafash.
Yeah.
And you have this wonderful quote, the challenge in Mussar practice is to achieve menucha, rest, even as the storm rages around us. Mm-hmm. It's a great line. Mm-hmm. It's a great line. It goes to the sense of the zihirot, which I understood as enlightenment of the soul. So talk to me a little bit about, before we start running out of time, of this concept of menucha, because, you go to the prayer book and, this Shabbat rest, you rest, but it's just not like lying down and just chilling.
No, I tell a story in the book about a rabbi who was in a hotel in Hong Kong, and it was Shabbat, so he wouldn't use the elevator. So he was walking up the stairs of this huge, building. So he gets up to the 16th floor, and he's huffing and puffing and huffing and puffing. And one of the staff people says to him in the hotel, "Why didn't you use the elevator?" He said, "I can't. It's my day of rest."
Right.
And so it's not the obvious. Already you see it's not obvious. It's not simple. It's not just very, very banal. The idea is there is rest, which is just physical rest, and then there is equanimity, which is spiritual balance. And the quality that we have the opportunity to develop through Shabbat is that idea of equanimity, that idea of a balanced mind. So, yeah, the storms are raging around us. The world is in real difficulty. Our own lives are being constricted. Anti-Semitism and this and that. It's all real. The question is, do I contribute more to the world through my agitation and worry? Or do I contribute more by having my emotional life balanced and clear, and then with that judgment, that ability to judge more clearly, am I going to be a better contributor to the world? So it's not a disengagement from the world. It's saying that there is something, a quality that can be cultivated internally. And that is, again, one of the lessons of Shabbat, because if you're not going to be able, if you take a workshop, Shabbat is a workshop in in emotional balance, then that's a quality that will carry on, and you'll have some ability to do that. Just like with my cell phone this Shabbat, it's like, oh yeah, I don't need to be overwrought with the current wave that's coming my way. And I use the analogy of a surfer. A surfer doesn't want a flat sea. The idea is not to live a life of perfect tranquility, which is a world with no waves. The question is to be able to ride the wave, and in fact, sometimes even to enjoy the wave, and to use that energy of the wave and then propel forward, but not through agitation and worry and wasted energy, but really engaged in that way, and not emotionally numb, not in a coma, feeling the emotions, but in a sense rising above them. And that is actually the definition in a book that was published in 1811 called Cheshbon HaNefesh. He talks about rising above the emotions. So you have them, but they don't dominate you. They don't take you over, but you still experience them and then have a balance and move forward like that.
One of the things I wanted to mention too for my colleagues and other people who are very, very interested in Mussar and that growing community, in the end of the book, you have this bibliographic essay. It's several pages of real intense. It's not a footnote. It's not like a citation of so-and-so or, the book of Numbers, whatever, but a series of, extended footnotes on a scholarly basis if you want to follow up some of these issues that Alan raises in the book. I want to point that out to you because when you get the book and you start reading it, and my colleagues, especially and educators, pay attention to that because it's a very, very valuable aspect of the book.
I'll comment on that just very briefly. One of the things about being a spiritual orphan, is that you don't know who your family is. You don't have your lineage. But that bibliographical essay is part of an attempt on my part to identify the lineage, that we are linked in this chain, and that's the chain to which we are linked. And I find it extremely valuable because generation after generation after generation, wise Jewish teachers learned something about life, and they've passed it on to us through that chain. That's very valuable.
Yes, the Lador Vador aspect. The book is about Shabbat, but yet in the contemporary North American world, with very rare exception, Shabbat is going to the cleaners, attending the soccer games or this, or driving carpool, or doing the things that I can't do during the week of the week. The very few people who attend a formal worship service. Every colleague I know struggles with, we say the words, but how do we get Amcha to understand the power and the importance, especially in this day and age, of what you're writing about in Shabbat? How do we do that? I know it's an impossible question.
No, it's not impossible. That was sort of part of the intention of the book. It's an impossible question to get right, but it's not an impossible question to answer. And the answer for me, and that's why I wrote the book, is to let people know this is important for your life. This is not because I think you should. There's no finger wagging here. There's no sense of, you're going to go to hell. But look, how satisfying is your life in these areas? How much joy, how much sense of contentment in the material world, how much sense of peace, etc., etc. And if a person thinks that these are qualities that they would value having more strongly embedded in their lives, then our tradition says, here's a mechanism. So I'm starting, and I think that may be part of the answer to your question, starting with how satisfied are people with their inner skills, how much more room is there for improvement in what they bring to their lives, and then looking at what our tradition has offered for millennia as a mechanism to cultivate yourself. And, the one of the things I cite in the book, and I, since writing the book, found another source as well, is a midrash from like the first millennium saying, does God care if I slaughter an animal from the front of the neck or the back of the neck? And the rabbi's writing, I think it was around 900, said no. The mitzvot, the commandments, were given to refine human beings. They were for our sake, to refine ourselves and to make ourselves more whole and more holy. And so the real perspective the Mussar teachers gift to us is to relate to other people in terms of their sense of wholeness or brokenness or partialness or suffering, and set those two things up against one another. How whole are you? How broken are you? And then we're all broken right now. There's so many reasons to be broken. So the work of tikkun, of making our lives whole, needs mechanisms, needs practices. And guess what? One of the central practices for all times, as a Yiddish writer said in the 19th century, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, the Shabbat has kept the Jews. And so this is a way of bringing it into the modern world as spiritual practice and in terms of personal self-development.
The Shabbat Effect, Jewish Wisdom for Growth and Transformation. Dr. Alan Morinis, founder of the Mussar Institute, mussarinstitute.org, correct?
Correct.
2 S's in Mussar.
2 S's.
So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Good luck with the book.
Thank you.
As I said earlier to my colleagues out there and Jewish educators, pick this book up. You can get it at the usual places, Alan, bookstores, Amazon, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
It is a very, very useful tool, not only for adults. I would suggest perhaps our young people, confirmation, post bar mitzvah classes, who are also searching in their own way for a sense of meaning and purpose in a world in which they're growing up in, which doesn't really make too much sense to them right now. So this is for all generations. Alan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Stay safe, stay well, take care of yourself, and I appreciate your time very, very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it as well.
To all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us in today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. If you'd like to support our work, and we really do appreciate it, if you go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, there's a conveniently located donate button. Just click on it, follow the prompts, and we do appreciate it. Very much appreciate your time and look forward to hearing from you. Just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And we thank our producer, the great technological genius, Steve Lubetkin. To all of you, we appreciate your time and look forward to greeting you on our next Seekers of Meaning. In the meantime, stay safe, be well, be kind to one another. Shalom.